redeeming the time. Days of evil. It's good to see everyone here this morning. We especially appreciate the Leach company here. They sure stock us up when we are short from some of our own membership. I shouldn't say company. I think all we have today is just the special forces. The whole company's not here. But anyway, it's good to see that bunch here, and it's good to see all of you here. We have several amongst our number here, our family, that's just not feeling well. Redeeming the time, for the days are evil. That used to be my number 2 when my dad taught Bible classes, which, as with Dad's classes, anytime I took them, and he was also a school teacher, he taught physics, analytic geometry, and also trigonometry, and I had to take all 3 of them my senior year, while my fellow classmates were taking basket weaving to up their grade a little bit. I had to take those math classes because Dad taught them, and I could not make a B in Dad's class. That was forbidden. Not going to happen. I had to hustle, and so when we got to the Bible classes, it was no different. And so when he started handing out memory verses, I jumped on John 11:35, quick, Jesus wept. If that one ran out, Ephesians 5:16, redeeming the time, for the days are evil. And when he asked me, how come you always pick that short one like that? I said, well, I'm trying to make best use of my time, because it doesn't take me long to memorize that verse. He did not appreciate that. Nevertheless, I've always been intent on being economic in my view of how I spend my time. Try to make the most of what we do when we do it, that kind of thing. I've called it for a long time economy of motion. Found out that was not something I coined. That was very old. Frank and Lillian Gilbreth were scientists, husband and wife scientists, who studied this back in the early 1900s. And what they attempted to do was, well, it was the first concept of multitasking, because they tried to get to where you would use both hands to do something simultaneously so that you could get more done. You get twice as much done. It's kind of like patting yourself on the head and rubbing your tummy, or switching up. I don't know. You've got to be ambidextrous, specially skilled, or just confused to do that right. But doing 2 things at one time with your hands, but doing things that were different with your hands. It was the invention of multitasking, and the reason they did that is because they were trying to have an economy of time, economy of motion. You want to do as much with your time, be as productive with your time as you possibly can. Now, I've been struggling with that lately. Maybe you guys can relate to this. Some of you are a little bit older than me, a few nonagenarians, octogenarians in here. But I've begun to struggle with this multitasking concept. Okay, let's be honest, I've never been a good multitasker, but I try to have an economy of motion. If I'm going to go out and I'm going to mow the lawn, I go and I start the garage, because that's where my gloves are. I got tender preacher pants, so I go to the garage, I get my gloves, I go from there, and I know in the bedroom that's where most of my stuff, I get my hat, because I wear a special hat when I mow, and I get a couple other things, special boots that I wear when I mow, and then I go out to the barn, and so what I do is I go through the house, get my waters, I go through the kitchen, economy of motion. You go one to the next, and then I get to the barn, and I discover I left the key in my dresser drawer to the bowl. And it's a total fail of my economy of motion. Now, I don't know whether you experienced that or not, but it got worse here the other day when I walked back from the barn to the house to get the key. I get in the bedroom, I forgot what it came for. So, I know it's a struggle sometimes, and when I talk about redeeming the time, you want to use your time as best you can. And it's kind of interesting that the phrase is used, redeeming, because most of the time when we talk about redemption of something, we're talking about buying something back. But it's an irony here as that is used in that way, because when you look at James 4:14, and we talk about, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. What is your life? It's a vapor. It appears for a little while, or a little time, and then it vanishes away. One of the foundational concessions I think a Christian makes when they really come to know who they are, who God is, what Christ has done for us, is that my time is not mine. As a matter of fact, Paul kind of summed that up when he said, I'm crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live, but I'm not really living. It's not me anymore. I don't control me anymore. Jesus does. I'm giving my life to Him, which indeed implies that my time is not my time anymore. As a matter of fact, God is in charge of all time. Acts 17:25, God is in control of it. God is the one who gives breath. He's the one who takes life. He is in control of everything. He's the only one, really, that knows how long Jeff's life's going to last or yours. And so really what we're looking at when we say redeeming the time, we're looking at realizing that what I have is right now. Now, I think that's wonderful in some senses, because why do I pine about yesterday? I can't change anything. It's happened. It's history. Why do I worry and be in anxiety over what's going to happen tomorrow? Because I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't even know that there's going to be a tomorrow. Why are you anxious? Jesus asked his audience in Matthew 6. Why are you anxious? You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And of course, his summation of it was the famous verse we all know, 6:33. Seek first the kingdom of God, his righteousness, all these other things we added to you. God's going to take care of it. Don't worry about things, because you don't know. So when we talk about redeeming the time, really what we're talking about is managing the time God gives us, whenever it is and whatever it is, whatever he gives us, managing it efficiently. There's an economy of motion. There's a redeeming of the time, getting it packed and full of things we ought to do or ought to have on our minds that are priorities, which brings up the idea of how we live. And this is something that struck me. Maybe you'll share this notion with me as I kind of explain it. But you know, we are a culture of distractions. You realize that, of course. We are an entire culture of distractions. In fact, when you talk about, you know, leisure time, I've always thought that was a really cool phrase. Leisure time. Really? You got time to be in leisure? If we're redeeming the time, you know, with the distractions. Now that's not to say that we got to work 24/7, nose to the grindstone, never have a break. God rested on the seventh day when he created everything, and it wasn't because he was tired, okay? He was giving us an example of the fact that when you do your work for 6 days and you do what you ought to do for the 6 days, you're going to get tired, and you need a rest. So that's a good thing. But we ought to be redeeming the time, and more of a leisure time. Can you imagine back in, I've been reading a lot of Restoration history and stuff, and back in the early 1800s, how folks that were settling with manifest destiny, going west and settling, you imagine how much leisure time these folks had. They didn't have a green John Deere that's getting on to plow up things. If they were fortunate, they had no mule that pulled something and did one furrow as they went. That'd take a long time for a lot of acres. And it was fighting off Indians all the time, so they got to be alert all the time, and they got to educate their own kids, and half the stuff that they educated them with was the skills and the trades that they had to have in order to clothe themselves, to feed themselves. And so they had lots of leisure time. You know, when I read a bunch of stuff on Abraham Lincoln, which is a fascinating character, Abraham Lincoln did lots of his reading, nearly most of his reading, by candlelight. Why is that? Well, he didn't have a lot of leisure time. He didn't have a lot of time to spare because he was out working. You know, we live in a culture where we've gotten used to convenience. I think convenience is a curse in some regard. Not that it's handy to have, you know, some of the conveniences we have. I suspect that there's many of you here today that drove over a mile and a half. You know, you walk a mile and a half, it takes a while. My legs wouldn't stand a mile and a half. Jimmy, you saw him a while ago. He doesn't do that anymore. Mile and a half is off his platter, okay? I imagine many of you here have the convenience of a vehicle, and that's why you were able to drive from whatever distance you drove to get here. So yeah, I can see convenience as being convenient, but sometimes I think the fact is we spend so much time trying to accumulate these conveniences, these distractions, that we lose our focus. I think that was one of the cases there when you talk about Luke 12. And there was a guy who was a rich guy. Now, there's nothing wrong with being rich, okay? I like rich people. I like making friends with rich people. But rich, that's not the main focus of life. Now, somebody can handle money good. I like to hear that. I handle the Bible. I hope I handle it well. And somebody knows finances, that's wonderful. Being rich is not the problem. Being out of focus is. And if you'll read with me in chapter 12, the crowd talked about somebody come up to Jesus while he's in a crowd and went, divide my inheritance with me. I'm having a scrape with my inheritance. Well, that never happens, does it? Well, maybe it does. And he tells him, who made me a judge or arbiter over you? And what he basically told him was, you got a flaw in the bottom line of how you're looking at the circumstance here in life. He said, take heed and beware of covetousness. One's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses. Now, the question then is, well, how did one come to possess so much that they have now confidence in these possessions? Well, he gives an illustration of a guy that did real well, and he built barns, and he built bigger barns so he could store more, and oh, I'm going to step on some toes, I just know it. But you know, in our culture today, I am amazed at the money that can be made in storage containers. I'm telling you, I got a buddy who lives over in Clifton. He started out and built like 3 or 4 metal containers to have a storage thing. And when he filled them up, it wasn't a month or 2 later, he was building some more. He's got 5 acres of storage containers bought and paid for, because we in America love to have big houses and then we like big storage. It is amazing to me how the analogy there works even today in our culture. Sometimes we are so distracted with everything we got to have that we forget what we're about. I'm reminded of that black preacher that went with Billy Saul Estes on his ranch, and Billy Saul was so proud of all his land, and he said, what do you think of all this? And the preacher said, that's all going to burn up. And he's right. It is amazing what we spend our lives doing. And money's just one facet. There are so many other things of which we could be distracted. I had an uncle-in-law that died, and we went really cheap on the inheritance thing and stuff that he had to get rid of. And one of the things he got rid of was $32,000 in a comic book collection. Now, I was kind of stunned at the money that was involved in that, but as I understood it later and started looking up stuff, these people that collect comic books like that was worth about double or more. It's just that we need to get rid of it, and that's what happened. We got rid of it for this guy. $32,000 in a comic book collection. Now, maybe I'm missing something on values here in modern culture, but I'm telling you what, that sounds like a distraction to me, and I wonder what cost was involved in purchasing all of those brand new, and what was the worth of it. This day, in chapter 12, verse 20, this night, misspoke. Catch me on this. Okay, I'll read the scripture. This night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? By the way, God started that with food. You know, it's amazing to me when it comes to redeeming the time, the things that we find that are such a priority that are not really a priority at all. In Colossians, there's an interesting text if you want to turn over there. Colossians, the 4th chapter, the 5th verse. I think, too, there's an element of redeeming our time and using our time wisely that recognizes how brief our time is on this earth. We need to use it to its best. So, and therefore, when we go to Colossians chapter 4, verse 5, walking in wisdom, or we're told, walk in wisdom toward those who are outside. Now, if you understand that Colossians is written to Christians, we're talking about those who are not Christians. They're not blessed with the hope that we have of going to heaven. And we see them every day. And we talk to them, and they're friends of ours. They live next door to us. And what we're told to do by Paul is you walk with wisdom toward those who are outside, redeeming the time. Why is that? Because their life is just as short as mine. And we don't know the moment that they may leave this planet, when we could have said something to them, very possibly, that might have changed the course of their eternity. And we didn't take the opportunity because our focus was on something else. And so therefore we should be redeeming the time. Not just for ourselves, so that we can be faithful stewards of God's good gifts. You've got to realize everything's God's. And that being the case, what I have, I really don't have. It's something God has blessed me with. And the real test of it all is whether I'm a good steward and I'm using what God gave me to the best of my ability. And if I don't use it to the best of my ability, I'm going to stand accountable for that in the judgment. But also there are those that are our friends, our family, those who we care about. And we need to be redeeming the time because, frankly, folks, We ain't got all the time in the world. Our life is like a vapor, and we don't have time. There needs to be an urgency about it. Matthew 16, 1 through 4. There needs to be an urgency that we have about those who are lost. I realize the difficulty of saying things religious to people in this culture today. I understand that. I realize, too, the idea that when you're not one of those that goes along to get along, that, oh, whatever you believe is fine, let's just all have a group hug and get along. That's the popular thing today, but that's never been taught in the Bible. That is never the objective of a Christian. If we are a light in the world, we're going out where there is darkness, and the concession has to be made. There's darkness out there. They don't know. You have an opportunity to change somebody's life. Now my question is, are you redeeming the time? Are you looking for the opportunities as they arise, because God will give them to you, as they arise, so that you can say something to somebody that changes the course of their eternity? Now what's interesting, though, is the second phrase of that Ephesians 5:16 verse. Redeeming the time, why? Why? Because the days are evil. There's a text back in the Old Testament I want to reference. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 1. This was always quoted to me too when I was a young man. My dad and my grandpa just they beat me on the head with this thing. And now I understand why. As I approach some older years, remember now your Creator in the days of your youth, because the difficult days, evil days, some translate it, come, and the years draw near when you will say, I have no pleasure in them. I've heard and I've read a lot of stuff from commentaries about what that second phrase means in Ephesians 5:16. You know, redeeming the time, for the days are evil. What does he mean by days? Well, it's an evil place we live in. Well, that's true, but I don't think that's what it's talking about. No, I think it's talking about, in the context of it, you don't have a whole lot of time. You need to do things while you can do them. I'm discovering, and I know some of you are older than I am, or some of you are my same age, and you've discovered too that I can't do what I used to do. My son grabbed a basketball up the other day, and I had this flush of adrenaline run through me. And then wisdom took over. If I was to get out there, I'd pull things I forgot I had. And it's like, yeah, what I used to do, all of a sudden I can't do what I used to do. And some of you are even more familiar with that than me. I understand that. In fact, I'll tell you right now, as I've said before, and I'll say it many more times, those of you who are not 100% fit, those of you who are aged, we're to respect the hoary head, the gray head. Those of you who are struggling with physical ailments you'd rather not even share publicly, and I can understand why, and yet you're hurting. And we got some that ain't not even here. Bless his heart, I miss Ben. I'm sorry, I miss him not being here. Several others. But I want you to know when you are here, and I know you're hurting. I know you're not 100%. You are an encouragement to me and many others here. Your mere presence tells people through a megaphone, God is the most important thing in my life, and I want to be here. I love visitors coming in when they're traveling, and they're out here like the Leaches here, and we've got other visitors here. When it's important enough for them on the first day of the week to meet with the saints, that's impressive. That tells me volumes about the individual who says, God is first in my life. That's why I'm here. And you know, when you start getting older, it's not as easy to get up, get dressed, and get ready. And there's more than one, I call them sympathy sticks, that's derogatory, I apologize. There's more than one here, Scott Kane, to help them get through the day and get down the road. I appreciate the struggle that involves. Because for those of you that are younger, remember your Creator in your days of your youth, because you're going to get old. If you do, you're going to find out Satan was very effective in his curse of death in this world when Adam and Eve made the mistake. We're going to talk about that tonight, or this afternoon. But he was real effective. I've sat beside many of them, held the hand of many a person who's passed from this life to the next existence. And I guarantee you death is ugly. It has never been pretty. This concept of this noble going out of this, no, I don't agree with the guy that wrote Rage Against the Night and so forth. No, that's not the right attitude to have, but I can tell you this, your human body will not just give up. It just doesn't do that. Satan made it as ugly as he possibly can, because you know what? That's his last straw. He's done. Jesus overcame death. And so we need to remember our Creator. In fact, hear the whole conclusion of the matter. Fear God. That's the end of this chapter in Ecclesiastes. Fear God and keep His commandments. In chapter 9, verse 10, that's why we're told. And this is an old man speaking from great wisdom. And by the way, Solomon tried everything, a bunch of stuff he probably shouldn't have, but he tried it, and he decided life is vanity. That's a big portion of Ecclesiastes. But in chapter 9, verse 10, he says, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might, for there is no worker device or knowledge or wisdom in the grave where you are going. And then he mitigates that by saying, I return saw unto the sun, the race is not to the swift. I mean, you can do the dead level best you can. You may not win. That's okay. You just do the best you can. The battle is to the strong, nor bread to the wise, riches to men of understanding, nor favor to men of skill. But time and chance happens to them all. For a man also does not know his time. Like fish taken in a cruel net, like birds caught in a snare. Sons of men, listen, are snared in an evil time when it falls suddenly upon them. I think I understand, if you don't now, if you don't by now, that when he said, you need to redeem the time because the days are evil. As you get older, those evil days, that's something Satan instigated, and he is tearing you down as we speak. As your body gets older, you have less and less capacity physically than what you once did. It becomes a great deal of burden to the point some get to a point where they are more than ready and will call out, come Lord Jesus, because this body is not worth living in anymore. That's why you got to redeem the time. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, you need to redeem the time. I want to close with an incident in the life of Jacob. I don't know whether you're familiar with Jacob in the Old Testament and his life. He started out kind of rough. I mean, he come out right off the bat, grabbing onto Esau's heel, and he was going to take over. Usurper. And the things he did. Started out with mama, lying to daddy and getting a blessing. And that was not a great thing. And then he had to run for his life. His big brother said, when daddy dies, I'm going to take care of little brother too. And so he had to take off. And then he found out how it is on the other side of when you're deceptive, like he was with Esau and his daddy. And all of a sudden, he found the master, Laban, his uncle, or his soon-to-be father-in-law. Laban was pretty good at deception. I can't even imagine waking up after the wedding night and discovering the woman you're with ain't the one you bargained for. That had to be a shock. I don't know how that happened, but it did. And he woke up with Leah instead of Rachel. And of course, too, he found out what it's like to have more than one wife. I would never advise that. That's just not wise. All through his life, he had 2 wives and 2 concubines, and they were never, it just seemed like they ever got along. And they had problems with the kids. Oh, the kids had problems. You look at Jacob's life, and it was a mess. It was tough. And then his favorite son, by the way, you shouldn't have a favorite kid, and even if you do, don't say so. Just not wise. He gives Joseph a coat of many colors. How'd that end out? Oh, well, Joseph got sold, and kids told him, well, wild beasts got him. So he lives the better part of his life thinking his favorite son is dead, got eaten up by a bear or a lion or something. That's a tough thing to live with. And so by the time you get to Genesis 47, this guy's been through the ringer, okay? He's had a hard life. Now, I'm not saying any of us here has had our kids eaten by a bear, but I know some of us here have kind of had, well, as they say in cowboy terminology, been rode hard and put up wet. I don't know whether you understand that, but that's just not a good thing to do. So he's standing before Pharaoh, and you just imagine the scenario here. He's just discovered that dead son he thought was eaten by animals. No, he's alive. Not only that, he's number 2 in Egypt. He was second in charge of everything in Egypt. He's standing before the king, and he blesses the king. By the way, we know from way back in the day that the guy that's the greater blesses the lesser, right? Melchizedek blessed Abraham. Melchizedek was greater than Abraham. And so the guy that's greater, Jacob, is obviously greater here. But when the Pharaoh asks him, if you look in chapter 47 of Genesis. You know, all of this is coming to a culmination, and Jacob has no idea how plush his retirement's going to be. But nevertheless, he's standing before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh asked Jacob, "How old are you?" And I've always thought this is one of the finest responses that a guy can give when he's had a hard life. Jacob said to the Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. I want you to notice he recognized the fact that we live in right now on borrowed time. It's not our time, and it's temporary. It's just a trip. It's not the destination." And he says, "Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers and the days of their pilgrimage." From a guy that's cocky and taking charge and taking control of his own destiny, ripping off the blessing from Esau, that arrogance has come to complete humility. And he says, had a hard go of it. What he doesn't say here, it's been mostly self-inflicted, which is true. But what he does say is, I have not attained to my fathers. I have to be honest. And that's why I started with this, with the idea of those folks in the 1800s. What was their leisure time? How much time do you think they spent saving time, as the saying goes, with conveniences that allow us to do so much more? My question is, are we, with all our conveniences, are we doing so much more? That's a serious, introspective question. Because when I look back at the culture in the first century, where Peter gets up and preaches to people, because he's redeeming the time. He's walking wisely amongst those without. And they had 3,000 souls. A little later, 5,000 souls. A little later, they were persecuted, Acts 8:4, and went everywhere preaching the gospel. And here we sit in Hamilton, and here we are. And look at the conveniences we have. I don't know about you, but I am very fearful and I got trepidation about going before the judgment, because you know what? Abraham didn't have the conveniences I do. Even with all the great Roman roads they had, Paul did not have the conveniences I have. And my question looking at me is, am I redeeming the time? It is an indictment. By the way, this sermon was preached to me, okay? If it helps you, good. But I'm looking at my life going, you know, there are so many distractions in my life. And I got to ask the question, am I redeeming the time? Because I'm beginning to feel it. I'm going to be 70 in a couple of months. I'm beginning to feel it. The days are evil. Are you doing what you can do? Are the rationalizations, the conveniences, the excuses that we use for the multitudes of things we don't do? James will say, to him that knows to do good and does not, to him that is sin. And that's what we need to remember. When we don't do what we need to do, we are not redeeming the time. And the days of evil are going to come upon us, and they're going to take away the abilities once we have. I don't know what your situation is spiritually right now. Okay, but I can tell you this. You got no guarantee you're going to walk out of this building and live another minute. There is no guarantee. Jesus could come. And when he comes in the clouds with his angels, the shout, his trumpet, the archangel, all of that event occurs. There will be no time anymore. Literally. And my question is, where are you right now? You need to redeem the time, because the days are evil. You need to respond. We always welcome you. And we do so while we sing an invitation